Hi there, I'm Tom from Tom's Grinder Lab, and this is the review of the DF54, a bang for bucks quality grinder with one flaw. And to be fair, it's a flaw for me, it may not be for you, but I'll unpack that on the way through. And this is the grinder that we're reviewing today. Well, let's go and have a look at our agenda. As usual, I'm going to give you the summary right up front because I know you like to scroll to the end and get that, so we'll give you the conclusion up front to save you doing that. If you want to hang around, we'll deep dive into the specs. We'll have a look at the DF54 in the Grinder Lab. We'll have a look particularly at workflow and retention. What I don't like, we'll look at that. What I like the most, which is a fair bit, and who this is going to be best for. Let's rock and roll. Summary. Now, as you're probably aware, I categorize the aesthetic workflow value of espresso filter and milk, and I award beans, a bean rating. Instead of a star rating, it's 5 beans potentially. I'm giving it 4 beans for aesthetics, and look, this is beauty is in the eye of the beholder, so you make up your mind. I think it's quite a good looking grinder because it's short, it's a nice form factor, small footprint, so I'm giving it 4 beans out of 5. Workflow, definitely 5 out of 5. It's got a plasma generator with one little quirk, which I'll unpack a little bit later, but 5 out of 5 for workflow because it's really simple and very easy to use. Value, unbeatable value, 5 out of 5 beans. You simply can't get a grinder that produces espresso in the cup as good as this for anything close to this price. In fact, I put this head to head against a grinder and burr set that is literally 4 times the price, and this thing won out. So 5 out of 5 for espresso. For filter, not a fan, but I'm not the filter aficionado of the world. So, and I'm really interested if you've got this grinder and you've been using it for filter, please do let me know your impressions, post them for other people as well. But for me, it's 1 out of 5 stars for filter. For milk, 4 out of 5. Very nice for milk-based espresso, but not quite going to give it 5. That gong goes to the DF64V. So let's dive a little bit more into some of the specs. What we've got is a flat burr 54 mil proprietary burr, which performs with absolute excellence, world class. This grinder, by the way, was sent to me for free in exchange for a review from DF64coffee.com. Forgot to mention that. Before you decide that makes me biased, maybe go to the end of the video and then make a decision. I'm quite happy either way. But yeah, that's full disclosure. But the reason I mentioned that, it triggered that thought, was that it is a proprietary burr. And to be totally transparent, I kind of didn't want to like the grinder because it's a cheap grinder and I've got a lot of expensive grinders, and so there was an unconscious bias. I'll unpack more of that, but I just want to say, probably right up front to help you perhaps with the purchasing decision, is that this is a grinder that produces faff-free, very high quality espresso across the whole espresso range, from dark, medium, light, and even Nordic or cinnamon. Stepless dial, it's a little stiff, but it's got nice big numbers. We'll unpack all that soon. 150 watts power, which may not sound a lot, but it's really down more to the torque. And because it's spinning at over 1400 RPM, it works absolutely fine with every sort of roast depth, including the light roast. A plasma generator, so low retention with one quirk. Unpack it soon. 4.6 kg, relatively small, relatively quiet. So if bench space is an issue for you, or you want a grinder that's not, you know, as like a pitch, like the DF64V has got a very high pitch, this is probably a pretty good option. Any color you like, as long as it's black. There are very, very low margins on this grinder, I've been told, so don't expect discounts on it, and don't expect a variety of colors or a lot of other fancy bits and pieces, because it's, at the end of the day, a budget grinder. But I would hasten to add, it's not just a budget grinder, it's an exceptionally good espresso grinder. As is all things DF grinders, it came exceptionally well packed, direct from the factory in China, actually. But as I said, sent on behalf of the wonderful Anna from DF64coffee.com. So lots of styrofoam. As this thing gets dropped, it's double boxed. If it gets dropped, it's going to survive it. This is what you get in the box is the catch cup. There's cable, obviously, grinder. There's the instruction manuals, which is adequate, perfectly adequate. This is the grinder on my in the Grinder Lab with the bellows on top. You'll see here the catch cup is angled. The catch cup does a great job. It's nice and close to the exit chute, so it catches all the grinds really well. There's no spray as such, other than what gets caught in the cup sometimes. Not sure if you can see it very well, but there's also a little rubber mount which sits on top of the forks, and you want to use that, otherwise this cup will vibrate off. Without the bellows, and I'm kind of a bit torn as to whether to use the bellows or not. I've used it a lot without the bellows. I've just put them back on this morning, and I'll show you why in a moment. And it's to do with if you're doing back-to-back-to-back grinds. So this is it alongside one of its probably closest competitors, the Breville Smart Grinder Pro. It's a grinder I like in terms of the espresso. It's not great, but it's good, and it served me well for many years. So you can see size-wise, it's kind of similar, perhaps a little smaller. To be fair, the Breville Smart Grinder Pro is an exceptionally good bang for bucks type grinder, and it's got all sorts of things such as programmable shots, cups, etc., etc. It's very clever grinder, but it doesn't deliver in the cup espresso as good as the DF54. Another competitor would be the Varia VS3, and make sure you subscribe because they will be doing comparisons between different grinders in terms of what they're like in the cup. So make sure you subscribe so you receive updates on those. So here it is alongside the Varia VS3. I very much prefer the form factor of the Varia VS3. I'm a big fan of the Varia VS3 now that they've got their motor issues and everything else sorted out. I think it's a beautiful looking grinder. It comes with 5 different burst sets, but this is not a review of the Varia. Just to let you know, alongside slightly less expensive, I think, the DF54, depending on where you are in the world. So you get to choose. Both of them deliver very well in the cup. This is the DF54 alongside its big brother, the DF64 Gen 2, one of my all-time favorite grinders, and the DF64V, also an excellent. So the DF range of grinders there, lurking in the background, you might be able to see is the steam train, as I affectionately call it, the DF83V, which I also have a review floating around on the website somewhere. So let's have a look at the grinder in action in the Grinder Lab. I'm going to step back and, oh yes, by the way, sponsored as always by www.monastery.coffee. This particular bean is absolutely delightful. Monastery Coffee are based in Adelaide in South Australia, and they kindly send me a bag of beans every month to use in the Grinder Lab. Speaking of which, let's go and have a look at Grinder Lab. So this is it on a carousel, 360-degree view. As I said, I think I must say the bellows cap does kind of, pardon the pun, cap it off quite well. Grind time, pretty quiet. Obviously until you put the beans in. So this was 20 grams, medium light roast, fine espresso grind, 27 seconds grind time. And you can see as the grinds are falling into the catch cup, there's very little spray. Retained grounds, I measured at less than 0.2 grams, so very little in terms of retained grounds. Let's have a look. Tap, tap. Nice and fluffy. So this pours with a Weber unifilter basket, so it'll be a relatively even color extraction, but because it's a high extraction basket, it will not be spread evenly across the basket. The thing to look for with high extraction baskets, or light roasts in particular, is the evenness of color. As I said, this is a medium light bean. So that's it from the Grinder Lab. Let's have a look at some of the things I'm not a big fan of. The dial is quite stiff, so you kind of got to grab it by 2 hands and move it around. It's not a deal breaker for me, but just be aware it's not as smooth, silky smooth like, say, a Niche Zero. Plus side of that, by the way, is that it doesn't move at all. The flaw that I mentioned before has to do with this little log. Now, I log every single espresso shot, whether it's Grinder Lab work or I'm just pouring espresso for myself. One of the tests I do on new grinders is the increment test. And what I like to do is I get the grind dial and I start at whatever, and I just take the dial down 1 digit, 1 notch. See here, the dial is on 13, is 12, is 11, is 10, and 9, and 8. And what I'm looking for in this column here is a incremental, predictable reduction in the flow rate. So at 13 on the dial, I got a flow rate of 2.2 mils per second. Now, the reason that flow rate is important is that you can dial in a stronger flavor, maybe even a bitter, or a softer flavor, or even slightly sour, depending on your taste preferences, or you can balance it exactly in the middle, wherever you choose that might be. So being able to change the flow rate and get the flavor, the strength of flavor you want in the cup, is dependent on the grinder producing a predictable change in that flow rate when you have a small incremental change on the dial. So you can see here, 13 on the dial produced 2.2 flow rate. Drop it just one digit and we drop the flow rate by 0.3. That's not a biggie in and of itself. It's a modest change, not a tiny change, but not a massive change, but a modest one. But when I drop the dial another digit, I would like to see that flow rate drop a little more. Instead, it stayed the same. Drop it another digit, it's actually gone backwards to 2. I would expect that to go down by 0.1 or at the most 0.2, I would hope for. From 9, we drop down suddenly from 2 to 0.6. That's a chunkier sort of a change, just with one in the flow rate, just with one change in the dial setting. And now we've gone down to 8, we've gone back up. Now, it's really not a deal breaker for 90% of the prosumer espresso population. For me, it's a real niggle, and so it's something that would disqualify me using this to dial in, say, a light or a medium light espresso roast. It wouldn't worry me at all with a medium or a dark. If you're having milk with your espresso, it's no biggie whatsoever. But for me, it's a tiny flaw. And to be fair to DF54, this is very common, and especially amongst bigger burr grinder sets, so the 83 mil flat, for example, 98s, etc. You don't expect to have absolute consistency and predictability and small incremental changes in the flow rate if you're doing small incremental changes in the dial, other than the wonderful DF64 Gen 2, which does exactly that, which while it still remains as one of my favorite grinders. So, in summary, not a deal breaker for pretty much anyone, and you probably wouldn't even notice it unless you're a bit anally retentive like me and keeping a log. And this next one is not so much a flaw as just something I found interesting. The picture on the left shows the catch cup after one grind, and you can see very little static. Picture number 2 shows the catch cup after the 5th consecutive grind, back-to-back grindings, and you can see the plasma generator is not doing its job as well. Virtually all those grounds ended up in the catch cup, so it's not really a complaint, certainly not a deal breaker. I just thought it was kind of interesting that plasma generator in the DF54 at least doesn't seem to work as effectively if you're doing back-to-back grounds. Let's get on to what I like most. And one of the things I like about this, briefly touched on it before, is the nice big numbers on the dial. Even though it's a relatively small circumference to the dial, the numbers are nice and big, the pointer is nice and sharp. It's not the most premium end grinder in the world. You have a little plastic thing here with a pointy, looks like a 3D printed indicator there, but it functions really well, and it's likely to be incredibly durable. And it's simple to use as well. I quite like that. This is inside the grind chamber. All the component parts, steel, pretty good quality. I wouldn't say it's the most finely engineered grinder in the world, but it's pretty darn good. And these are nice, strong rubber mounts here for the upper burr carrier, which you can see at the top of the picture there. So let's have a look at a side-on shot of the thread once you remove the grinder collar. Some of the finish on these parts is a little rough, but it really doesn't feel rough, and this is the close-up photo, and it's probably a bit more revealing than you would normally see with the naked eye. But the thread is good quality steel, and I've shown this photo just to remind myself to mention that with the early DF grinders, the original 64 and the original 83, it was very easy to misthread the collars, which was basically rendered the grinder pretty useless. So with the DF54 and the DF64 Gen 2, DF64V, DF83V, they've used a much higher quality component on the threads here. So it's quite hard to misthread. That's a big plus for me because I'm changing burrs and doing deep cleans fairly often. So top-down shot showing the anti-popcorn plate. This little rim here pops up. It's got a nice rubber gasket underneath. It's a really snug, nice fitting. And this essentially is what you're going to pour the beans through, and this little plate here is the anti-popcorn that stops the beans from flying out all over the place. So who do I think the DF54 is going to be good for? Essentially, it's for you if you like great espresso, and regardless of the budget. So small damaging admission, I suppose, here. When I first got the DF54, I didn't like the coffee coming out of it. And I was going to give it like 2 stars, 2 beans out of 5 beans, something like that. And I thought, to be fair, I've really got to blind taste test this. And since I've set up the Grinder Lab and I'm able to do blind taste test comparisons, do the grinds in simultaneously with 2 different grinders, do the pours simultaneously with the 2 decent DE1XL espresso machines I have, blind taste test using a Lazy Susan labeled underneath, take a log, etc. It's been a revelation. And I thought, to be fair, before I compile this review and give the DF54 2 out of 5 beans for espresso, I should do a blind taste test. So I did that. I set up the DF54 against a niche duo with Mazza K151H burrs, which are expensive burrs from Mazza, high-end espresso. And I blind taste tested 7 times. And I tested a range of espressos, including a Nordic light and a cinnamon roast, which is kind of like an ultralight roast. The DF54 won 6 out of 7 blind taste test comparisons against a niche duo with the K151H burrs, which is a setup which is 4 times the cost of the DF54. In the light espresso, this is what really blew me away. In the light espresso range, the DF54 delivered in the cup, layered, nuanced, subtle espresso with enough acidity, not too much, to make it, well, win most of the tests against the Mazza burrs and the duo. So it really produces 5 out of 5 star or bean espresso. So it's for you, regardless of whether you're on a budget or not. Don't think of this as a grinder you would buy if you simply can't afford a more expensive grinder. This passes the acid test I have of every grinder, which is this. If God were cruel and I could only have 1 grinder on my bench, would I be happy with this grinder? And the answer with the DF54 is a resounding yes. The fact that it's a budget price grinder makes this an exceptionally good buy. So for those who love a bargain, it's for you. For people who like fat-free single dosing, but it's not for those who are worried about fine-tuning like I obsess over a bit of it. And after you've clicked like and subscribe and shared this with your friends, make sure you go to www.tomsgrinderlab.com, where you can download my guide to making exceptional espresso. 27 pages, lots of checklists, lots of optimization opportunities. Hope to see you soon with the next review. Cheers.